Welcome back, everyone, to our second return episode of All Things Testosterone. My name is Brandon Church. I'm the founder of the TRT community and host of All Things Testosterone. Today, I'll be chatting with a true pioneer in the realm of metabolic health and testosterone replacement therapy. We have with us today Shalin Shah, a distinguished longevity expert, the CEO of Marius Pharmaceuticals, and the director of the Testosterone Project. Shalin, I appreciate you being here today. Can we just start with you jumping off and telling us a little bit about your background and what led to longevity and testosterone?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess all things health and wellness have been core to me for some time. Uh, Interested in exercise and nutrition. I come from a family with a healthcare background, but myself personally did not sort of professionally pursue anything in that space, right? I was always more business oriented, looking at what the opportunities are and going after them, regardless of what the industry is. So that's why I went to business school. I was in finance, private equity, hedge funds, and investing in different companies and although helping them from an operational level, right? It wasn't just, from a pure investment perspective. And then about 10 years ago, so I've been involved in this project or this company for 10 years now. And this is around the time when the FDA made some negative changes around the labels and introduced cardiovascular risk as a concern for TRT, which we all know is not the case. And actually now they've reversed course. But at the time, again, a lot of commotion, and as you know, people sort of leave hot topics pretty quickly when something bad happens. And as an investor, that's when it got interesting. And I started looking at the drug. It was in phase 2 development at the time, and kept digging deeper. And testosterone, I wondered to myself, I said, if this had a clean background, clean name, fresh start, this would be the most valuable molecule in the world. And again, the role was not really understood and still is not today, right? How much of a metabolic hormone this is. It's really just thought of sexual health and muscle building, obviously steroids, baseball, banned substance, etc. Which again, it couldn't be further from the truth. So that's when I got involved. And, fast forward now 10 years later, we're out there in the market marketing Kyzatrex. And really, and why I do things like this, and I think it's so important, is education, right? People really need to understand what is the role of testosterone in the body, what does it do, and then also what are the impacts of testosterone deficiency,
Mm-hmm.
because that is such a large uh, disease, if you will, right?
Sure.
So again, you have 25 million men that are affected by this just here in the US. Testosterone is also a female hormone. This is a global issue, etc. So I think again, for all said reasons, this is why it's become an incredibly passionate project here, not just a company, but really sometimes I say public service, because we
Yeah.
want to go out there and help.
Yeah, and that's tough. That's why I got into it originally as well, because I was looking into my own levels and trying to determine if it was an option for me, 12 years ago or so. And there wasn't good information out there. There wasn't even a single Facebook group that I could, at least there was one I found out later that was secret, so I couldn't find it, but there wasn't anything out there. So I started the TRT community Facebook group, and same as you, my mission has been to just educate. Um, Out of curiosity, what kinds of businesses were you in before you got into the health field? You said that you were investing in various things.
So it was across the board in terms of some consumer, it could be energy, industrial, some of the health and wellness stuff. We were actually the largest shareholder of Vitamin Shop.
Okay.
So, that connection was really there. And again, when you combine the professional and sort of that personal quest, if you will,
Yeah,
it presents a nice opportunity.
definitely. When you mention metabolic, so one of the very common questions that I see in my Facebook groups is, you know, does TRT or testosterone help you lose weight? The easy answer, the answer that everybody that everybody throws out, the bro science, is no, it doesn't do anything for weight loss. What I can tell you anecdotally is that when I'm on TRT, I can definitely eat more food and gain less weight and or lose weight. Do you know the science? Can you break down the science of why that is, how it is or becomes metabolic in that way?
Right. So there's two things that I would point to when it comes to that. And like you rightly say too, it's not just, these are not single directional explanations for again metabolic health. We know a lot of these are interconnected processes which set off other sort of chain reactions. But in terms of the fat component, so testosterone does drive fat metabolism. And you look below that, you look at like say mitochondrial health, right? So testosterone has a very key role in mitochondrial health and the ATP process. So I think it goes back to even just the fatigue, right, as being a primary symptom that shows up in TRT
Yeah.
or testosterone deficient men. First, fixing that mitochondrial health and increasing ATP is effectively increasing energy across your body.
Yep. And
So you're moving more
yeah,
and you're burning more.
your body, and that's typically how I would kind of explain it to people in my groups or on the podcast, is that the mitochondria, people don't realize they're the powerhouse. That's the factories that are building cells. So when you boost those, get those working efficiently, your whole body just works better, including your metabolism, right? Like you're across the board, you're just doing better than you were before. You coined the phrase livable longevity. Can you unpack that for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So longevity is definitely becoming, I got to call it a buzzword, 24, 2025. This has been maybe from, Atias of the world and Brian Johnson's and whatnot. So this is definitely what people, the new, it's just the it thing to do,
Yeah,
right?
it's up there
But
with
I think,
biohacking, if you
yeah,
wanted to say it.
exactly. Biohacking is maybe gets to some different realms, but longevity is something that I think the general population can rally behind and say, yeah, I want to live longer, but also live better through my prime years. So when I put together livable longevity, I said, look, there's so much out there, and it's really overload for most people that are thinking about this concept and want to introduce sort of longevity protocols into their life. So how do you take all of this information, synthesize it down, and then break it down into protocols that you can actually repeat and stay consistent with on an everyday basis? Because those are going to be the ones that have the most impact, right? So again, the longevity needs to be livable. If you can't do a protocol of 100 supplements and 10 different exercise modalities and nighttime routines, morning routines, midday, it's not going to work.
Do you find
So
that testosterone, when you introduce the testosterone, the TRT, into that lifestyle, does that knock out three or four other things that you might have to supplement with, just adding the
good
T?
question.
You know what I mean?
Potentially. So I like to think about it as, and I'm a big proponent of again holistic health, right? So diet, sleep, exercise, stress. These are the big ones, and this is foundational, non-negotiable. But right above that does sit hormones, and you have to. And again, honestly, a lot of people are overlooking it. A lot of traditional medicines not checking these levels and treating it, but those have to be in place if you want sort of the rest of the pyramid to be able to come together and you want to do peptides or some of the other protocols and whatnot. The hormones are the basic messengers in the body, so they have to be at appropriate levels for everything else to function. So directly to your question, I think a large lift can come from, say, testosterone and testosterone replacement. Is it going to get you 100% of the way there, or is there always something more that you can continue to optimize? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, if we think about livable longevity, you're going to get a wide amount of benefit, with a single intervention. And I think that's important for people to think about as they're building their programs.
Yeah. My background in testosterone is more from a mental health perspective, anxiety, depression, that kind of thing. I didn't have the typical signs, the erectile dysfunction. I definitely had lack of energy, but I didn't realize it. But motivation. And so what I found is that, I'm not the type of person at a baseline that can keep up with a regimen, that can take 8 or 10 supplements and do the diet and the exercise and function. But when I add that testosterone, it focuses in my mental abilities, and it gives me the ability to be on that regimen. So I'm just going to forget the 6 different supplements that I'm supposed to take when I'm off TRT. When I'm on TRT, I hone in, and it just kind of holistically changes my outlook mentally on health. So I'm more likely to follow the diet plan, the exercise plan, the supplement plan.
Right. Absolutely. No, I think that makes sense. The two things I'll add there, and first is sort of a caveat, right? Because we're talking about testosterone, also mentioned Kyzatrex. So for us, we took Kyzatrex through FDA approval process, got it approved for men that have testosterone deficiency due to certain medical conditions. And again, that's our indication and whatnot. So we don't say this treats depression or
Right.
general fatigue or whatnot, right? Like doctors need to clinically diagnose and then use that. So that's just a caveat. But I think as it relates to the research and sort of what you're seeing in the clinical world, it absolutely, testosterone definitely has impacts on all these areas.
Yeah. I'll say it
So
all day long. Anecdotally, as someone who did not take Kyzatrex through FDA approval, testosterone in general, over tens of thousands of men and women, is helping with the mental health as well.
absolutely, and the studies are there. So that's why it's beautiful, because if you look at a lot of the researchers that have been in this space for not just 1 decade, I'm talking about 2, 3 decades beyond, right? Again, like you're saying, tens of thousands of patients that have been treated. You look at the studies that look at have been controlled, right, against placebo, and saying, okay, what rate of these patients have major depression or moderate depression and pre and post TRT, and there are significant improvements
Yeah.
in this. So I think it requires two things. One is further research and studies should absolutely be done with even products like Kyzatrex to bring this to these patients, and mainly for the providers that are treating these patients. So now they think about this,
Yeah.
right? And it's not only on the patient to kind of go and do the research and bring these options. Providers should be helping the patients in this journey.
Yeah.
Second is testing. Like, it's a simple blood test, and it's an overall marker of metabolic health, whether it's cardiovascular, whether it's mental, whether it's you know diabetic related, right? Glucose control or metabolism. This testosterone testing should be standard on every blood panel for definitely every man over 40. You can argue to get a baseline early and then track it through life too, because everybody's level is different. But this is a simple test with great insight that we're frankly missing today.
Yeah. And there's 2 hurdles there, right? There's one, getting the doctor to test you. The first time I got tested, I actually had to take the requisite on the way to the lab core to get the labs done, and I had to check the box for testosterone on my own. Probably illegal, could probably be thrown in some sort of insurance fraud. I don't know. I ended up having to pay for it out of pocket, but my doctor wouldn't do it. I went in and
Mhm.
said, I'm 30. I'd like to check my testosterone levels. And he was like, well, look at that beard. You don't have low T. We're not going to do it. And so, yeah, I took the rec. I went, boom, checked it. Sure enough, I came back low. The second hurdle is that I came back at 377, and that wasn't low enough for
Mhm.
him and my insurance company. How do you see with Kyzatrex? How does that play into it? Because Kyzatrex is not, oral is not the cheapest option. If you're going outside of insurance, do you see people having to, are they using insurance? Are they not using insurance? And how do you overcome that hurdle?
So two things there. One is Kyzatrex is a cash only product,
Okay.
and we made that decision when we launched because we understood the payer, the insurance market, and the requirements for a branded, Kyzatrex, a branded therapy versus a generic injection or a generic gel, it's going to require prior authorizations, which offices hate, step edits, which means you need to try something else first, right? Fail another
Yeah.
therapy. So we already saw all the hurdles if we go a traditional path. And we also knew we have an extremely frustrated patient population that is trying to get help. And these guys are going to throw more barriers in front of it. We did not want that. We think this is about access at the end of the day. So by going cash, again, non-intuitively, like actually increases access
Yeah.
because it's clear, it's transparent, you know what you're getting. Second bit, as you relate to levels, which kind of again goes back to this insurance problem, if you will. If your levels are above, say, 300, and that number is continuing to come down, they're tightening that, which again doesn't make sense because they're using reference levels, and just because you're above that reference level, which represents a unhealthy population, doesn't make you healthy,
Right.
right? So, but in your example, say 377, you'll definitely get rejected by insurance.
Oh yeah. Did. Yeah.
So why even subject patients that are in this zone where clinicians that are familiar with therapy, they are the best ones to make this decision and decide based on your symptoms and everything else going on with you holistically, is testosterone an option? Um, so again, for Kyzatrex, clinicians are ultimately decide without the barriers, does it make sense for these patients?
If you were to take Kyzatrex or injectable forms of testosterone gels, creams, whatever, and you just turn them over to, I'll call them random doctors, right? What do you see? Because kind of the reason I exist is is because when you do that, those doctors aren't educated. They don't know. So you really that's why, I point people to hormone clinics specifically, because it's such a crapshoot trying to find a brick and mortar insurance accepting doctor that knows what to do. So that's another hurdle. The doctor says, well, you're within normal limits, there's nothing I can do. These people aren't educated.
Mm-hmm.
The patient isn't educated. So they walk out of that office thinking, well, testosterone's not my problem because the doctor says I'm within normal limits. Me and you are fighting a losing battle trying to educate people on what your level actually should be. Um, so what are you seeing? And I guess who's prescribing the Kyzatrex?
Yeah, good question. It goes to the heart of what you're saying. So we really work with clinicians, providers, offices that do understand testosterone therapy, that value testosterone therapy, that want to make sure their patients are educated and understand the options, and if it makes sense, can get treated. So that's really where all the focus is for Marius right now. That said, these are long-term missions and changing. And I think one big thing that will help bring back that traditional provider, even though again the education hasn't been much in terms of what they actually learned in medical school and whatnot, um, is the label change from the FDA,
Yeah.
right? So a month ago or so, about a month, a little over a month, the FDA reversed the black box warning for cardiovascular risk on testosterone products. And that is tremendous news
Yeah.
because FDA does not like taking those things away.
Right.
They really try not to,
And they resonate with the patient, with the end user. I mean, that's huge.
because it comes up all the time, right? I'm sure it comes up in your
Oh yeah.
discussions and whether like, does I heard this causes heart attacks,
Yeah,
right?
it doesn't even come up as a question, of I heard this, is it true? It comes up in a, how do you guys mitigate your heart, cardiovascular event risk? It's a this is this is a thing. How do we keep it from being a thing? Not even, is this really a thing?
Hmm. Yeah, no. So I think, and I've talked to countless providers, which otherwise I would regard as good doctors, right? But they're not aware of this, or they just, again, the headlines have been pounded into them for the last decade plus.
Yeah.
So we are definitely going to work to try and correct that, and I think that should help this patient bounce around issue. Is it going to change overnight? Absolutely not. But it gives us something to move forward on.
Yeah. Connect some dots for me. So you're the CEO of Marius Pharmaceuticals. I saw the Kyzatrex sign in the background before we started recording. You've mentioned it a couple of times. You've talked about bringing Kyzatrex through FDA approval. Is Marius the patented or inventor of Kyzatrex, the manufacturer? What is Marius?
Correct. Marius, Marius Pharmaceuticals is the owner of Kyzatrex.
Okay.
So Marius owns the IP. We are, marketing Kyzatrex, right? So Kyzatrex is our product.
Yeah.
Granted, Marius is a single product company, but Marius is the company. Actually, Kyzatrex is the product.
How did you get involved with Marius? Did you start Marius? Did you get involved as an investor?
So yeah, Marius, from the beginning, I was involved and effectively formed Marius around this asset. Because again, this is post FDA cardiovascular carnage,
Yeah.
I call it, and this asset, which was Kyzatrex, was sitting on the shelf,
Okay.
and we knew there was a lot more to it. The market for just men so large, and that's again. That's why Marius was formed, to take Kyzatrex through trials and then eventually bring it to market.
So the next hurdle that I'm sure you see with an oral form of testosterone is liver, right? So how do you educate on the effects on the liver and that it's not a negative thing?
It's a ground game and it's an air game, right? So Kyzatrex is lymphatically absorbed, so that means it goes through the small intestine. There's no liver toxicity from the drug based on all our data thus far. So yeah, you have this old notion that oral is liver toxic. So one, we try to refer to this as next generation oral, right? There's been an improvement, there's been a change, and that's what we have in Kyzatrex. But it's in every conversation, right? We have to bring it up. We have to be proactive, address it, show the data. But then you go high level too, and that's why being on podcasts, doing interviews, speaking at conferences, you can begin to educate out there. So this notion can effectively get corrected.
Yeah.
And so we try in any sort of collateral opportunity to make sure that we're educating and
Yeah.
they understand this is not the old liver toxic testosterone.
It's really just a boots on the ground fight in my experience. You say it over and over and over again, whether it's testosterone makes you healthier, or oral's not liver toxic anymore, or this myth has been dispelled. I'm saying the same stuff every single day.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about preventative TRT and how that revolutionizes or could revolutionize healthcare.
So I think, if you think, and this goes back to broader disease state education, right? Understand what are the implications of testosterone deficiency, right? I mean, on one end, there are large studies that look at just overall testosterone deficiency and all-cause mortality. So, right, very simply, you can say potentially if you have low testosterone, you have an increased risk of, say, early death, right? So you can, obviously, patients are going to think, okay, do I want that? And then you can look at individual disease states, right? So we talked about longevity earlier. I'll reference, a TS4 horseman, right? You got cardiovascular disease, you have type 2 diabetes, you have cancer, and you have dementia. Testosterone plays a role in each one of those.
Yeah.
And people don't know that. So I think it goes back to testing, understand where your levels are, and if deficient, have this conversation with your provider. So it's a simple solution generally, right? You're replacing what's missing in your body. You're not, modulating in different ways that have these tremendous downstream side effects. Again, with Kyzatrex, the side effect profile that we've seen is relatively good. I mean, we saw an increase in blood pressure that was 1.7 millimeters increase in mercury, which most clinicians can manage or not be concerned about. And that was the only thing that ended up on our label
Yeah.
from a Kyzatrex specific perspective. And I think the other big issue with TRT over the years has been, because things have been primarily administered by injection, and the nature of it, because you're not doing it every day, you are driving patients to super physiological levels because you need to maintain that testosterone over at least a few days, sometimes and more often a week. And that's when you generally see these things like elevated hematocrit levels or excess estrogen conversion, or maybe elevated blood pressure. Because again, ideally, your body's making testosterone every day. So how can you most closely mimic that natural circadian rhythm?
Yep.
Right? I think medicine is a blend between adherence and compliance, and then physiologic. What can you where can you give and where do you meet to make it the most effective?
Yep. 5 years ago, it started becoming, well, you can just stab yourself and inject every single day. And that's rough. I'm not a big fan of needles, 12 plus years in TRT and peptides and everything else. And I'm doing a lot of injections. I hate it. So it's nice now to have, and then obviously the topicals, you've got the gels that don't work. You've got the creams that can work, but they're kind of a danger to your wife and children.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the oral comes around. And I've tried Kyzatrex myself, back probably about 2 years ago. And it's nice to have a daily form that is not an injection, that's not a dangerous cream or topical or gel or whatnot. Um, which leads me to, what are you seeing? Are you seeing patients achieve the same results, the same objective numbers with the oral form as with injectable or creams?
So broadly, I'd say yes. So I'll refer to two things. One is if you look at like the data from the phase 3 trials, and this is across patient ranges, different dose regimens. The Cmax in a day was around 1,000, right? So 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. So that is pretty much in line. If you look at injections, maybe sometimes you want to get to 1,100, 1,200. Again, a lot of people are going super physiological, 1,500 plus, but it's a very solid blood level at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, the unique aspect about Kyzatrex is it has the ability to lower SHBG. So that's sex hormone binding globulin,
So you don't
right?
need the same levels.
Bingo.
Yeah.
You get this 30% reduction, and your free T, on average, at least again, phase 3 trials was up by 2x. We have some abstracts that have been published that almost hit 4x increases in free T, and that's what's driving the metabolic effect.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard that. There is the argument that, well, you don't achieve the same numbers with the oral forms as you do injectables, and I've seen that to be true, but I've never heard that it's reducing the SHBG, and that, I mean, that as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh, well, then you don't need 1,200 levels.
Exactly. And I think there's multi benefits, right? So you're not going so you're avoiding some of the side effects that we're talking about, right? And then you're able to achieve that same free testosterone level. I think the problem is a little bit, and again, that's what goes back to education, but like guys are very focused on the number.
Yeah.
So every clinician you talk to that even does treat testosterone will ask them, how do you feel first? Before they won't give them that number, because that number is going to influence the answer.
Right.
And I think we have to retrain ourselves a little bit and then focus on free testosterone.
Yeah.
And that's going to help a lot.
That's really interesting. I mean, even in my position, I wanted the objective data. I want the number. What's Kyzatrex doing for me, from a total and free perspective versus, 3 times a week injections, that kind of thing. And Yeah, you're right. I mean,
Objective data makes sense. I'm not saying it doesn't because, right, like we wear wearables, we live in a data-driven world. Like, we
but
want to know exactly.
ultimately, yeah, ultimately the subjective, I mean, objective is important, but the subjective, how am I feeling as compared to injections, that it's more important for me personally in my personal life. So it's just, it's kind of, in hindsight, it's interesting because I'm supposed to be that guy that, that talks to the people and that can explain things. And I didn't even think about, I don't even remember how I felt. I don't remember.
Hmm.
I couldn't say, oh yeah, I felt the same or I didn't feel the same. All I could say is it didn't quite hit what the injectable hit. And I'm one that struggles with the hematocrit and estrogen and whatnot. So I would benefit even more than the average patient from the
Right.
oral.
So what I would say there are two things. Like in terms of patient types, we do see more success with patient naive or testosterone naive patients, right? They've never been on
Yeah.
TRT before. They haven't had this experience. Um, they do better than the guys that have been on injectables for 3, 4 years plus,
Yeah.
right? So if you're talking about 12 years on injectables, then it is more challenging. And the reason there too is, and why we want to do more work around this as well, is because again, no fault to any patient, but you've had to experience some of these super physiological levels for a longer period of time. And based on a lot of our discussions with leading researchers, like there is a receptor effect.
Hmm.
So your receptors can't take these super physiologicals forever and have zero impact and be just as potent for again receiving testosterone, right?
Right.
So then you switch that off and dial it down, the receptor is going to wonder a little bit, where's the rest?
Yeah. Well, and there's also that, when you're doing a once weekly injection, there's that roller coaster effect. Maybe you feel really great on days 2 and 3, and then you kind of start to come down. And when you're doing daily, whether it's topical, oral, or, injections, you don't get that same, I don't want to call it a high, but you don't get that
Correct.
peak where you do feel like you could go out there and knock down a concrete wall. It's more level. And so it's harder to judge the impact, I guess, on your daily life, which is why I've always kind of just tuned into my mental aspects. If I'm feeling good, no anxiety, and emotionally, if I'm well, that's where I'm trying to stay.
Hmm.
So, in addition to Marius, you're also the director of the Testosterone Project. What do y'all do over there?
So Testosterone Project is a nonprofit organization. We've got together some of the leading folks in testosterone, both on the male and female side. There's three main objectives with the Testosterone Project. One is descheduling testosterone. So, as you know, testosterone is a controlled substance. This happened as a result of Congress in 1990, as a result of cheating at the Olympics, right? It was actually a Canadian sprinter. And Congress went ahead and scheduled testosterone and made it a controlled substance. And this has sort of been wrong from day one. This no other hormone is controlled. Insulin is not controlled. Estrogen is not controlled. Um, and we know this is a safe and effective therapy. So descheduling testosterone is a big step towards better access, better patient understanding, and also provider understanding,
Yeah,
because they also think I'm writing a controlled substance.
yeah,
My license is a little bit more at risk.
yeah,
Do I want to do this? So not everybody just, you know, will flat out say it's fine. I know it's good for the patient. Like they think in the back of the mind with the liability,
yeah.
right? So descheduling testosterone. Second is testosterone testing. Make testosterone standard on blood panels, right? So the U.S. Preventive Task Force needs to come out with a recommendation there. So again, before a person's put on an SSRI for depression, like let's screen their testosterone levels. You're going to find a huge overlap of patients.
Yeah, yeah.
It's again, it's not an expensive proposition. It's actually over the long run. We have a lot of work and studies that have been done on this. How much could be saved
Hmm.
by the healthcare system if you introduce testosterone testing and actually therapy as appropriate.
Everyone is handed an SSRI. The amount of people in my non-medical world that that self-regulate that, or that discontinue that without doctor oversight, is astounding. once they start TRT. So it's like, I've been on TRT for 6 months and I just quit taking my SSRI and I'm doing great. And it's like, it feels kind of dangerous for you to just stop like that. But it's crazy to me, the amount of folks that are able to come off of them.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree, and I think that's why the work should be done, and it would benefit a lot of people.
Yeah. So you're
The
also,
third, I'll just
go ahead.
mention the third prong there, which is really important. It's female testosterone. It needs to be an FDA-approved product for females.
Yeah.
So education needs to be better on the female side, and then we need to bring that through. You have what's the rate of women that are going to hit menopause? 100%.
Yeah.
And I think what's great is that community has been extremely vocal. We've been working with a number of the leading experts, and I think honestly with this new administration, it's finally a possibility.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a big win for patients.
Excellent. You're also speaking at a biohacking conference next month, right? You got any sneak peek of the talking points there?
Correct. So I think we're going to take it, given the audience, we're going to take it a level deeper and really look at things like mitochondrial health and what the role is of testosterone and what it's doing. So kind of get to the cellular level across the board, because even the people that are in this space, I haven't seen enough of really these underlying mechanisms and so forth that need to come up. So I'm excited for that talk.
Cool. Where do you see the field of testosterone replacement therapy and hormonal health heading in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think this is going to be front and center for preventive healthcare.
Yeah.
I think it will be the most adopted therapy. Full stop.
Do you think we'll ever get it to a point, because it's come a long way in the last 10 years or so, but do you think it'll ever be at a place where people, because it almost feels to me like it's like at an eye roll, there's too many people on TRT level. Is it ever going to just become normal? Like this is something that you need to start 30, 40 years old and not roll your eyes that, it's overprescribed?
I do think so. I think it will come there because there is momentum, there is a bit of a wave, and I think that's why you're seeing this. Oh, there's too many people on it. But once you get sort of the traditional providers, whether it's primary care, even cardiology, starting to back this because of the health benefits, that tidal wave happens. I mean, look at GLP-1s. And people still say they're overprescribed, fine.
Yeah.
But 2 years ago, nobody was writing them.
Yeah.
Now every day there's an article saying, well, GLP-1s are going to help with dementia, it's cardiovascular risk, and so on, right? Testosterone does a lot of those things.
Yeah.
It's just not as sexy right now.
Well, and I'll also add that I don't really care about the eye rolls. If the population is healthier because of the GLP-1, because of the testosterone, who really cares? I'm just curious what your thoughts were on, because I see that every day. It's like, oh, everyone's
Yep.
on testosterone. So interesting points.
But it's just we're living in this microcosm
Yeah.
too, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so many more. That's why I love when people talk to people that don't know about it.
Yeah.
And they're like, I'm going to go look into this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we're helping.
Yep. Where can we find out more about you, about Kyzatrex, about Marius, about the Testosterone Project?
Sure. So our websites are really educational. I would say, I'm at the Metabolic CEO on Instagram. Yeah, please check it out and follow Kyzatrex, KYZATREX.com. Rethink Testosterone is a good website for a lot of education. So rethinktestosterone.com and mariuspharma.com. These are all our web properties, but again, the main goal is education.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I'll probably reach out in the near future and see if there's some other. I mean, we're supporting the same mission, right? We need to be partnered
Absolutely.
together and powering through this. So we'll touch base and see if there's a better way we can get connected in the future.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the same, Brandon. So just, I don't know if you have. Well, I have the invite. I'll make sure I reply to it. You have my email. Let's set up a time in the next week or two.
Cool.
Love to chat more, and I'm sure there's some commonalities that we can work on.
Definitely. Awesome. Thanks, Shalin.
Yeah, pleasure, Brandon.
Yep.
We'll talk.
Bye.
Thanks.